The first thing I noticed was the sound, an unnatural rush of water, a torrent roaring in the background as I pulled into my driveway. My heart dropped. I didn't have to step any closer to know exactly what had happened. It was unmistakable. The floodwaters had breached the boundary between my property and Karen's. I stood there, stunned, as the chaos of her careless decision churned in my once pristine backyard. The smell of wet soil, the gurgling of water, overflowing from what was now an uncontrolled mess. This wasn't just a problem. This was personal. My anger flared, but underneath it, a cold, calculating calmness took over. This was a legal fight now. Before heading further in story, I request you to please subscribe and like my video. It will help to reach my goal. Thank you. Here you go. I knew Karen. Every neighborhood has one. The woman who thinks her wealth gives her the right to do whatever she wants. The one who struts around with her designer clothes, demanding attention and believing everyone else is beneath her. But what made Karen truly dangerous wasn't just her sense of entitlement. No, it was her utter lack of awareness of the real world. She believed she could just plop a pool into her backyard without consulting anyone, without considering consequences. Now, I was staring at the result of her poor judgment. I tried to take a deep breath. The floodwaters were now spreading across my perfectly manicured lawn, turning it into a quagmire. The edge of my patio was already beginning to show signs of erosion, as if the earth beneath me was slowly being consumed by her negligence. In moments like this, there's a temptation to act immediately, to march over there and scream at her for what she'd done. But I was a lawyer. And my specialty? Property law. This was my domain. I wasn't going to let her ruin my property without consequences. I pulled out my phone and began documenting everything. The ruined lawn, the visible water line creeping up to my fence, the drain pipe she had carelessly installed in her pool area that had now become a makeshift waterfall. This was going to be my case, and I'd need every piece of evidence I could get. When I knocked on her door, I wasn't angry, at least not on the surface. Anger would cloud my judgment. I was calm, coldly, unnervingly calm. I could feel the tension building as I stood on her doorstep, my eyes trained on the small cracks in the expensive stonework beneath my feet, the same stonework that, now, was submerged under several inches of water. The sound of gurgling water filled the silence between us, almost mocking me. She opened the door with a casual wave, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon light in a way that could have made it look like an advertisement for some high-end shampoo. She was wearing one of those outfits that screamed wealth, even though it was subtle in its extravagance. A pristine white blouse that was just a little too pressed, a pair of designer sunglasses that shielded her eyes, and heels that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Can I help you?" Karen asked, her voice syrupy sweet. The kind of sweetness that was thick with condescension. I had no doubt she expected me to grovel, to ask her for some kind of favor, or to make some weak request for her to fix the damage she'd caused. I stood there, not even flinching, as I slowly raised my hand and pointed over my shoulder toward my yard. "Your pool," I said, keeping my tone steady but sharp. "It's flooding my property." For a split second, her mask of cool composure slipped. The faintest flicker of surprise danced in her eyes before it was quickly replaced by a smug, almost bored look. "Flooding? Oh, please," she scoffed, brushing a hand through her hair as if the whole thing was a minor inconvenience. "It's just water. A little flooding never hurt anyone, right?" The insult hit harder than I had expected. I could feel my hands tightening into fists at my sides, my jaw clenching. She was minimizing it, dismissing the damage to my property, as though it were no more significant than a puddle after a rainstorm. But I knew better. I could already see the erosion starting along the edges of my lawn, the grass dying in patches where it had been submerged. The drainage system in her pool wasn't working properly, and now the runoff was pooling on my property, destroying what I had carefully maintained for years. Taking a deep breath, I fought to keep my voice even. "This isn't just water, Karen," I said, emphasizing every word. "This is flooding, and it's causing real damage to my property." She leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, her expression still laced with that unmistakable air of superiority. "Oh, come on. It's really not that bad," she said, her tone dismissive, almost bored. "Just hire someone to fix it, and you'll be fine. It's no big deal." I could feel the blood rushing to my face, the heat of my frustration creeping up my neck, but I bit back the urge to lash out. I was a lawyer, after all. I had been trained to keep my emotions in check, to approach problems with logic, precision, and strategy. But something about her arrogance, it was like she didn't care about the consequences, didn't care about the mess she had made. And that was the part I couldn't stand. I wasn't just angry because she'd flooded my yard. I was angry because she thought she could get away with it. I took a step forward, my eyes never leaving hers. "No, Karen," I said, my voice hardening. "It's not just a little flooding. This is a serious issue. You've damaged my property, and it's going to cost me time and money to fix it. I'm not asking for some quick fix. This is a legal matter now." Her eyes narrowed, clearly unimpressed by my words. "A legal matter? Are you serious?" She scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "You're being way too dramatic about this. It's just water. I'm sure it'll dry up eventually." My patience was wearing thin, but I forced myself to take another deep breath. I wasn't going to let her dismiss me like this. "I'm serious, Karen," I said slowly, my words cutting through the air. "You violated my property rights, and you're going to be held accountable for it." She chuckled, a high, mocking sound that was enough to make my blood boil. "Oh, really?" she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're going to sue me over some water? You really think you can take me to court for this?" I could feel the irritation building inside me, but I kept it under control. "Yes," I said, nodding firmly. "I will take you to court. If you don't fix this situation, I'll make sure the legal system holds you accountable." For a moment, Karen just stood there, her gaze flicking over my shoulder to the mess in my backyard. I could tell she was trying to calculate the situation in her head, trying to figure out how to get out of this without doing anything that might hurt her precious image. She wasn't interested in making things right. She was interested in maintaining her status as the wealthy woman who could do no wrong. "Well," she said finally, a fake pout forming on her lips, "I'm really sorry you're upset, but I don't think I should have to pay for your inconvenience. It's not like I did it on purpose." She paused, her expression turning smug again. "Maybe you should just hire someone to fix it. It's not my problem that you're so uptight about this." I could feel my stomach churning with frustration. She was treating this like a minor inconvenience, like I was just some whiny neighbor who didn't know how to handle a little floodwater. But this wasn't just about the water. This was about her complete disregard for the consequences of her actions. She wasn't even trying to understand how serious this was. It was as though her wealth made her feel invincible, like nothing could touch her. "You're wrong, Karen," I said, my voice steely with resolve. "This is about more than just the flood. This is about respect for other people's property. It's about the law, and you've broken it. So, if you think this is just something I'm going to forget about, You're mistaken. She rolled her eyes, clearly not taking me seriously. Well, if you're going to make a big deal out of it, I guess we'll have to see you in court, she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. But good luck with that. I have the best lawyer money can buy. I don't think you're going to win this one. A small smile tugged at the corner of my mouth, and I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Funny you should mention that, I said, taking a step closer to her, my voice low and almost amused. I actually am a lawyer, specializing in property law. Her smug smile faltered for a brief second, her confidence momentarily cracking. She recovered quickly, but I could see the shift. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had thought she was dealing with some ordinary neighbor who didn't know the first thing about the law. But I wasn't just any neighbor, I was a lawyer, and this was my turf. I could see the fear starting to creep into her eyes, though she quickly masked it with a forced laugh. Yeah, well, we'll see how that works out for you, she said, her tone suddenly defensive. She tried to shut the door, but I stepped forward just in time to stop it from closing. Don't worry, Karen, I said, locking eyes with her. You'll have plenty of time to think about it. I'll be seeing you in court. The confrontation with Karen had been intense, but it was only the beginning. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't take me seriously. She thought she could dismiss me with a shrug and a smile, as if her wealth and social status made her immune to the consequences of her actions. But I was a lawyer, and in the world of law, no amount of money could make her untouchable. The moment she decided to flood my property, she had stepped into my world, and now it was time for me to take control. I needed to think this through carefully. My goal wasn't just to fix the flood. It wasn't about getting my lawn back, too. The pristine condition it had been in before her pool caused the chaos. No, my goal was much bigger than that. I wanted to make Karen pay for the damage she'd caused. But more than that, I wanted to send a message. I wanted her to feel the consequences of her actions. She needed to learn that her sense of entitlement couldn't override the law. I started by reaching out to a local surveyor, someone I knew from past cases. He was a straight shooter, reliable, and meticulous in his assessments. If there was one thing I knew, it was that I needed solid evidence, and I needed it quickly. A good surveyor could provide an official report that would detail how Karen's pool installation had caused irreversible damage to my property. Not only would it confirm the flooding, but it would also measure the extent of the damage, erosion, water displacement, the impact on my yard's drainage system. It had to be airtight. While I waited for the surveyor to come by, I started gathering my own documentation. I walked around my yard, carefully snapping photos of the flood's aftermath. The water line had risen about 6 inches in some spots, and the soil near my fence had started to sink, a clear indication that water had been seeping under it for days. The edge of my patio was slick and unstable now, and a section of my garden had completely drowned, the once thriving flowers reduced to a sad, soggy mess. It was clear that Karen's pool had turned into an uncontrolled water source, and my property was bearing the brunt of it. I made sure to take close-up shots of the drainage pipe she had installed to handle the pool's excess water. It was barely functional, clogged with debris, and had clearly been installed as an afterthought, like the rest of her careless decisions. I knew this was going to be a key part of the case. She hadn't just flooded my property. She had installed a half-assed drainage system that contributed directly to the issue. This was a gross violation of basic property law. I wasn't just dealing with some isolated incident. I was dealing with negligence and disregard for others' rights. Next, I called a few of my neighbors. They had seen Karen's construction project unfold. Some had even commented on it at the time, wondering how it had been allowed to happen without any kind of notification or permits. One neighbor, an older gentleman who'd lived in the neighborhood for years, told me he had seen the workers digging and constructing without any permits or approval from the homeowners association. This was a gold mine for me. If Karen had bypassed the permitting process, it could make her whole project illegal, rendering any claims she had about it grandfathered in or approved completely moot. The real clincher was the photos he had taken during the pool installation. He'd seen workers installing the drainage system just a few feet away from the property line, directly onto my land. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Now, I had irrefutable proof that Karen's actions weren't just thoughtless. They were illegal. With the surveyor scheduled to come by in a couple of days, I began drafting a legal letter. This was the first step in my strategy. I wasn't going to let Karen get away with this. I was going to confront her head-on, in the most professional and legal way possible. The letter needed to be firm, but not aggressive. It had to be polite, but leave no room for doubt about the seriousness of the situation. I also wanted it to be clear that I wasn't just looking for a quick fix. I was prepared to take legal action if necessary. The letter began with the facts: the flooding, the damage, and the timeline of events. I didn't make any threats, not yet, but I wanted to make sure she knew the gravity of the situation. I outlined the legal violations she had committed, focusing on the lack of permits, the improper installation of the drainage system, and the damage she had caused to my property. I included specific references to local property and zoning laws, as well as any relevant codes that applied to construction projects and water runoff. But I didn't stop there. I added a final section, one that I hoped would grab her attention. If you do not take immediate corrective action, I wrote, I will pursue all available legal remedies, including filing a lawsuit for compensatory damages. Additionally, I will not hesitate to pursue public action to ensure that the full extent of your negligence is made known. Public exposure was going to be one of my key strategies. Karen may have been able to silence me with money or legal threats, but she wouldn't be able to silence the public. A woman like her, proud of her wealth and social status, would do anything to protect her image. If I could expose her reckless disregard for the law to the community, it would hit her where it hurt the most. It wasn't just about money. It was about reputation. I sent the letter by certified mail, ensuring that she would receive it and that I would have a record of her acknowledgement. At the same time, I started reaching out to local media outlets. I wasn't planning on going public with the story just yet, but I wanted to prepare the ground in case things escalated. The local news station was known for covering stories about entitled homeowners and shady construction projects, and I knew they'd be interested in the angle I had. A rich woman flooding her neighbor's yard because she couldn't be bothered to follow basic building codes? That was a story people wanted to hear. In the meantime, I turned to social media. I joined local neighborhood Facebook groups and started posting updates on the situation, keeping the community informed without going into too much detail. I made sure the posts were factual, not accusatory. Just the facts, and nothing but the facts. Neighbor's pool floods my yard due to poor drainage, I wrote in one post. We'll update as the situation progresses. I made sure to include photos of the flood and the damage to my lawn, but I kept my tone neutral. No anger, no threats. Just the reality of the situation. I wanted to build momentum. If Karen thought she could get away with this quietly, she was in for a rude awakening. She'd made a mess of my property, and I was going to make sure everyone knew about it. The next day, the surveyor arrived. He spent a few hours walking the property, taking measurements, and noting the extent of the damage. His report confirmed everything I had suspected. The flooding was a direct result of Karen's poorly constructed pool and drainage system. He noted the waterline marks on my lawn, the erosion around my patio, and the water pooling near the fence line. The report also confirmed that the drainage system had been improperly installed and was inadequate for the amount of water it was meant to handle. This was it. I had everything I needed: legal documentation, witness statements, photos, and expert testimony. I wasn't just going to fix the flooding. I was going to make Karen face the consequences of her actions, and I was going to do it in the most public and legal way possible. As I prepared to file the official complaint, I couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. This wasn't just about money or property, it was about justice. Karen had thought she could get away with her actions, that she could use her wealth and status to shield herself from accountability. But she had underestimated me. I wasn't just some helpless neighbor. I was a lawyer, and I was about to make sure she learned the hard way what happens when you don't respect other people's property. The days following my legal letter were tense. I watched, waiting for Karen to make her move. I had already set everything in motion. The surveyor's report, the neighborhood chatter, the social media updates, the media outlets waiting for the right moment. It was all aligning. I was in control, and it was clear that Karen didn't yet realize the storm that was coming for her. And then, just as I was beginning to wonder whether she would simply try to ignore me and hope it would go away, I received the phone call I had been expecting. It was from Karen's lawyer. I'd known this moment would come. It was inevitable. Karen had always been someone who believed that money solved everything, and now that she was facing the consequences of her actions, she was scrambling to contain the damage. Her lawyer was polite, but not so subtly condescending. Mr. Protagonist's Tointway. Last name, the lawyer began, his voice smooth and practiced. I understand you have some concerns about my client's pool and the damage it has caused to your property. I could almost hear the smile in his voice, as if he was already preparing to negotiate my silence for a small payout. We're looking into the situation. My client is more than willing to resolve this issue amicably. She would like to offer compensation to cover any damages to your property. I had to fight the urge to laugh. This was exactly what I had anticipated. She thought she could buy her way out of this, just like she had done with every other problem in her life. But I wasn't going to let her get away with it that easily. I appreciate the offer, I said, my voice calm and measured. But I'm not interested in compensation. I want the damage to be repaired properly, and I want my legal rights acknowledged. I'm not going to settle for a quick payout to cover up her negligence. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the lawyer recalculating his approach. I see. Well, I believe we can come to an agreement, but I must warn you, my client is quite serious about defending her actions. She's not the kind of person who takes these things lightly. That was when the gloves came off. I leaned back in my chair, knowing this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I would prove that Karen wasn't above the law. Let me be clear, I said, my voice firm. I have already taken the necessary steps to move forward with a lawsuit. I've gathered evidence, I have witnesses, and I have expert reports. If she wants to waste her time fighting me, that's her choice. But I'm not going to let her continue to destroy my property without facing the consequences. You can tell her that the only way out of this is for her to fix what she's broken. And I mean completely fix it. No shortcuts, no more lies. The lawyer's tone shifted. He was no longer trying to smooth-talk me into a settlement. Understood. I'll pass your message along, Mr. Protagonist's last name. But I must warn you, if we don't come to an agreement soon, this could escalate further. My client has deep pockets and will fight this to the end. I let out a quiet chuckle. Let's see if she has the stomach for a real fight. I'll be waiting. I hung up the phone, feeling a rush of adrenaline. This was the moment where Karen's world was about to come crashing down. She thought she could buy her way out of anything, but now she would learn that money wasn't going to solve this problem. It was time to show her the consequences of her actions. The next day, I filed the official lawsuit. It wasn't just about flooding my yard anymore. It was about making sure Karen knew that she couldn't get away with this kind of behavior. I included everything: the photos of the damage, the surveyor's report, the witness statements, and the damning evidence that she had bypassed permits and construction codes. I wanted to make it clear that Karen wasn't just a careless neighbor. She was a criminal, a person who thought her wealth could protect her from the law. I also made sure to send a copy of the lawsuit to the local news outlets I had been in touch with. The timing was perfect. As soon as the lawsuit was filed, the media would be ready to cover the story. The pressure was mounting on Karen now. Her lawyer tried to call me again, but I ignored it. The next day, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. It was Karen's lawyer, but this time there was no smooth talk. This was desperation. "Mr. Protagonist's last name," he started. "We need to talk. My client has reconsidered your proposal. She's willing to offer full compensation for the damage, plus the cost of repairs." I smiled. I could almost hear Karen's rage from the other end of the line. She didn't want to admit defeat, but here she was, trying to buy her way out of it again. But I wasn't done. I wasn't just interested in money anymore. It was about justice. "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice cold. "But my goal isn't just to fix the damage. It's to make sure this doesn't happen again. Your client has shown a complete disregard for the law, for the well-being of her neighbors, and for her responsibilities as a property owner. I'm not interested in compensation. I want her to face the full consequences of her actions." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could feel the weight of the silence. "Well, Mr. Protagonist's last name, it seems like we're at an impasse," the lawyer said, a note of frustration creeping into his voice. "But if you want to take this further, be prepared. My client will fight you with everything she has." I leaned forward, my fingers tapping lightly on the table. "Let's see who's left standing at the end of this, then." The media coverage began the following day. My lawsuit was now public, and the story was splashed across the front page of the local paper. The headline read, "Local woman sued for flooding neighbor's property, accused of negligence and illegal construction." The article was comprehensive, laying out all the facts: the damage to my yard, the lack of permits, the expert reports, the witness testimonies, and Karen's blatant disregard for the law. And of course, the pictures of the flooding, pictures that made Karen's negligence undeniable. But the media coverage wasn't the only thing that had Karen rattled. Her social media presence, carefully curated to show off her flawless life, was beginning to crack. People were starting to talk, and it wasn't long before a few of her neighbors began posting about the lawsuit, sharing the story on their own pages, and commenting on her behavior. Karen had always prided herself on being the queen of the neighborhood, but now the cracks in her carefully constructed facade were becoming too obvious to ignore. The final blow came a few days later, when the HOA sent out an official notice. The notice outlined Karen's violations: unauthorized construction, illegal drainage systems, and failure to comply with neighborhood zoning laws. Her pool was now officially considered a public hazard, and the HOA had ordered her to dismantle it and fix the damage to my property at her own expense. The notice also included the fact that Karen would be fined for her illegal actions. I couldn't help but smile when I saw the notice. Karen was finished. The moment her precious reputation had been exposed, her social status had unraveled like a cheap sweater. The humiliation was complete. But it wasn't just the financial hit that would sting the most. It was the public exposure. Everyone now knew exactly who she was, and they saw her for what she truly was. A woman who thought she could do whatever she wanted, no matter who it hurt. Karen tried to hold on to her dignity, but the truth had already been laid bare for all to see. The once pristine image of the wealthy woman with the perfect life was shattered, and no amount of money or lawyers could ever put it back together. As for me, I walked away from this, not just with a victory in court, but with the satisfaction of knowing that sometimes the law works, and sometimes justice is sweeter than anything money can buy.